Hi everyone, welcome to, I think it's session 6 of the day. Just a reminder for everybody to put their Slido onto Affiliation Hub 1 and 2, just for asking questions through the app as we go through the session, and I'll pick them up at the end. Just before we get started, just to introduce Stephanie, who is founder and CEO of KareHero, and Angela Gibson, who is going to be giving us an overview of what they're doing in TSB Bank.
Great. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you've had a fun morning and the food coma from post-lunch is over. So my name is Stephanie Leung. I'm the founder, CEO of KareHero. We founded this about 2-3 years ago. And at the time, we'd acquired a company which was 7 years old, and they had been helping adults in the caring space for a very long time. The reason why I started this company is because my father had a stroke and a heart attack about 3-4 years ago, and he got stuck in hospital. And what followed was probably one of the darkest times of my life, where you literally didn't know where to go to for support. And I swore to myself that I would not want to go through that sort of again, all by myself. And then finally I called a charity and they told me I was a carer. And that's where my whole life changed. I basically realized there's millions of us out there. So KareHero is basically around how we can support adults who have caring responsibilities. And today we'd like to just share very briefly what it means, bring the voice of the customer forward. What do employees go through when they're going through adult care? And I'm deeply privileged to bring Angela here today. So we work with TSB Bank. We feel really honored to bring our support and service to TSB. But TSB Bank started adult care as a focus way before we turned up. It is something that they've strategically aligned on over time. And I'm not going to steal your thunder. You should share your experiences. But Angela essentially looks after all employee experience inside the business. And she joined TSB about 8 years ago. And has really sort of led the management of relationships with trade unions, with colleagues' voice, with employment policies. And for almost 30 years now, she's literally worked alongside execs within the HR function to think and influence and strategically shape the people agenda. And she's constantly thinking about the future of work and the future of people, not about problems they're trying to just solve today, but really where's the bounce of the ball going to, and how do we build those bridges and those muscles today to be ready for the future. So I'm very excited. And Angela herself is a carer as well, so I'm sure she might be able to talk a bit about that. So before we do that, just a couple of slides. We'd like to share a brief video that talks about some of the folks who have used our service who are carers.
I always knew that I'd end up looking after my parents, but I didn't realise that looking after my parents was going to be so demanding, both physically and mentally.
Behind the numbers, really this is something that impacts their daily life. From the minute they get up to the minute they go to bed at night, they're always thinking about how to manage the well-being of another person who is entirely or partially dependent on them.
I was actually in a meeting and had a phone call from my next door neighbour to say that my mother had just been seen walking off down the street, and 5 minutes later my father walking out the house and going in a different direction with no shoes or socks on. So I had to drop everything and leave work, and I drove around the village until I found them both.
You know, you go through journey and you're bubbling along fine, you're focusing on your career, you've got your friends, everything's going tickety-boo, and then all of a sudden something happens out the blue. It's the emotional and mental challenge that I didn't expect.
My father suddenly had 3 strokes in short succession. Shortly after that, my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so it was something that I really wasn't prepared for at the time. The main challenge is, I think, is actually to try and fit everything in around the care, whether that's doctor's appointments, stays in hospital, running your own family life, running their house, taking care of all of their financial business, trying to work at the same time while you're looking after everybody.
There is an element of shame that comes with caring. She is going off and off her food more, and she's just reluctant to eat. I'm on conference calls, come down, make mum a meal, she won't eat it. I then see mum getting weaker, which then makes me feel a bit frustrated. Mum broke down in tears because she thought, God, am I going to go to a care home? She needs to eat.
They're trying to manage other things, maybe even young children, or multiple stresses in life, and it can be all consuming. It is not a part-time job. You can't just think about it when you have time.
My experience of burnout was very real. I had a bit of a breakdown. Work were fantastic and supported me with mental health. And that resulted in, say, 3 months off work, long-term sick. But at the same time, I'm still having to try and look after my parents, and while I'm not particularly on the best of health myself. The thing I found very difficult about looking after parents is you only know what you know, and trying to negotiate through the financial and the care system itself is a very convoluted and confusing system.
While she was in hospital, I reached out to KareHero. They took a lot of the admin off me, in the sense that they gave me a list of care homes in my area I could go and see, and they offered to arrange the visits. And as painful as it was, that was a great help. They also helped with carers, in a sense of explaining to me what the discharge process would be once Mum was released from the reablement team under the NHS.
I think having KareHero take that responsibility away from me certainly gave me more time. And with that time, I actually spent more time with my parents rather than visiting and doing things. I actually managed to spend time with them, spent more time with my own family.
It's a very lonely journey. It's filled with guilt because you never have time to look after them and look after yourself. And most people just accept that it's part of life and think it's just part of being a good spouse, a good sibling, good daughter, or good son. I built KareHero because I don't wish for anyone to have to go through what I've gone through all my professional career whilst being a carer. I would like there to be one place that people can go to for solutions instead of trying to figure out how to do it on their own. KareHero is a practical solution to help you navigate the complex journey of caregiving so that you are never alone. We're real people with experience of care behind the scenes to help you go through every step of the journey.
So thank you very much for watching that. If anyone's interested, we can send that to you as a video you can share with your colleagues. Could I just get a show of hands? How many people in this room have ever been a carer in this type of context or know someone in their family who is? Okay, so I'd say that's almost 85% of you in this room. So I'd like to say you are, or you know someone who is a carer today, whether they recognize it or not. One of the biggest things I want to say is, as a carer, you are literally hidden in plain sight, and you come to work every day carrying that load with you, and there's no sort of formal support in a lot of places in this country today. Right, so just 2 more slides. So many of you might have seen a presentation I did last time at REBA. We now as a country are officially looking after more adults than children. It isn't a sort of, by accident. This is baby boomers who've left the workforce. This is also because there's almost 8 million people now on the NHS wait list. And it's also because there's almost 3 million adults who are on long-term sick leave. Every single one of them has a carer behind the scenes who's trying to support them through that journey, and it's never easy. And we know women are more likely affected than men. It's great to actually have a video of men talking about some of their challenges, but women are disproportionately affected, and they will be 4 times more likely to leave their work or go part-time. We know that when they go into these particular, especially challenging times, they can feel like they're 50% less productive at work. But what's particularly alarming for us over the last year is that we've seen people come in who are younger than younger. So these are people in their 20s and 30s with their fathers or mothers, especially fathers with early onset dementia, or they might have siblings with MS. And we're all, in some cases, managing mom because mom has already burnt out from managing her parents. So we're seeing this impact multi-generations. And based on a Harvard Business School review done a couple of years ago, 83% of carers believe they are depressed, but they're so busy they haven't had time to go get diagnosed. And in the UK, 10% will walk out every year, and we never get them back in the workforce. So we've lost them permanently. This is a simulation on World Bank and United Nations data. In the next 2 to 3 decades, the largest and fastest growing cohort of the working population in the UK will be people over 40. And it means you might have a war for talent of people in their 20s and 30s, but the people you'll be relying on with those who are above 40. And so if more policies and structures are not in place to support them and the types of things that they will need to come into, like caring, we will end up losing good people. And I think that's something that will happen to every industry in this country. And one last thing I just want to share before, actually second to last, I think. One last thing is carers don't want to quit their job. They want to stay in work and be productive and continue to earn a living, because that is their identity. Very few people want to be a full-time carer all the time. It's quite exhausting. You get compassion fatigue. You can even be angry with the person who you love, but you don't want to handle all of it every day and just that. And they want to hold on to remembering who they were before this stuff started happening. So this now numbers over 10 million people in this country. That's 1 in 5 of us. And over 7 million of us are juggling work and care. And all these companies that are listed here, there's just some of them, but we are now seeing more and more companies actually really take this to heart and think about how are we going to really grapple with this future, because in some cases it's already here. Very last one. These are kind of, when we talk about a carer, we wanted to get behind the scenes. What are the real conditions that we're actually seeing when someone is a carer? Every single one of these conditions we have dealt with over the last couple of years. And in some cases, about 1/3 of our cases are people dealing with more than one condition, all the way from blindness to long COVID to strokes. And falls are very, very common as well. And it isn't just for people over 65. These are people in their 40s and 50s, etc. And I guess, actually, I'll skip this one. Right, so now move on to Angela. Thank you very much for your time. I know that TSB has been a real pioneer thinking about carers. And what's quite unique is I don't think it started as just an ERG, right? So.
No, we're 5 years now into our journey of supporting carers, thinking about carers, listening to carers. But it didn't start with a voice coming up through the organisation, with individuals coming to us to say, this is me, this is what I need, these are the circumstances and challenges we face. It wasn't until we started digging a little deeper to understand more about the topic did we hear that. So we started thinking about this as a strategic business agenda. Many organisations think about inclusivity, how do you build a workforce that represents demographics and so on. And often we talk about the most obvious parts of it. For us, there was a gap, the hidden gap that Stephanie's talked about today. The individuals working for us that were struggling with this juggle of almost having 2 jobs, work at TSB, but also their life outside of TSB. So it started as a strategic agenda. Made complete business sense for us to include it as part of our inclusivity agenda. But even more broader, I guess we have a platform at TSB called our Do What Matters plan. It's about our social responsibility. I guess it's our ERG, but we call it Do What Matters, and a strand of that is about people. The work that we do with carers, because carers, particularly because of the work that we deliver, we work in communities, we give a service to the general public. We're building concepts much more broader about the workplace, but I can't speak on behalf of others. My responsibility is to look internally into the organisation, but so it's a real thing for us.
Yeah, and I remember when we first started talking, you said that when you care about your employees, they will care about their customers.
Absolutely.
That empathy really carries through into everything you do.
Particularly because lots of our team, particularly our branch network, are working in communities. They get to, across the financial sector, if many of you might know this, know your customer is really, really important. So yeah, they do. They really care for their customers.
Yeah, so one of the common questions that we get asked is, we don't know how many carers we've got in our organisation, and our execs don't care. How do I bring this to light, or really help us understand as an organisation that caring for adults is a real thing?
So I guess when we started, we didn't know the answer to that question either. Yeah. We didn't know how many carers we had in the organisation. But as soon as you start talking, as soon as you start listening, as soon as you start inviting people to share, it becomes very obvious very quickly. Just in the example that Stephanie asked for a show of hands, you get a similar response in your organisation, and actually the demographics for us match those that Stephanie's already shared with you. So ours fluctuates a little bit, but on average 1 in 11, 1 in 10, sometimes it's 1 in 9. People are coming forward telling us about their caring responsibilities. And we've also added into our diversity disclosure mechanism, inviting people to disclose their caring responsibilities, so we're able to really truly sit with some confidence behind that data.
Now, one of the things that sometimes people say is, I already have care in my organisation. And then you look into the policies and you realise it's mostly about childcare. What are the main differences between being a child caregiver versus an adult caregiver?
I think if you asked the audience, we'd probably get the answer as well. We saw this as, and look, we got the challenge from, caregiving, is this about childcare? And of course, we're well equipped for that. A child's progression or a parent's progression is typically fairly laid out. Children has those milestone moments, they go to school and so on. The path is very different for caring. It can happen to anyone at any time, unexpectedly. Typically, individuals are faced with something new, not knowing where to navigate. The system to be able to navigate through, and I'm not talking about your workplace systems here, but the social systems are extremely complex. And all of a sudden, you're in a vast fear of unknown and uncertainty. So it's significantly different.
Yeah, and in terms of the signals, what were some of the first signs that you would often see of someone that helped you realise they're an adult carer? Because we know that oftentimes people don't actually call themselves that. Right?
It tends to be in those conversations that, one-on-one with your manager. You can see on one end, some individuals might be kind of struggling at work, their performance might be a little bit off, or they're thinking about something else. To the other extreme, where actually something happens and the individual is absent from work because their priority is moved from elsewhere. But the undercurrent is that people are trying their best to adapt and be productive, and that's exhausting.
Yeah, so is there ever, when you first started looking at this as a business, what were some of the challenges that you might have received back? Because as you mentioned at the beginning, you didn't know, and then you started gathering data. Did some people say, what on earth are you doing? Why are you gathering data? There isn't a problem here. Like, obviously, you very, very early started realising there is an issue, and now it's become more prevalent. But back in the day, what kind of challenges did you get?
It's tricky building a business case when you want to do something so compelling, isn't it? And at this time, Stephanie mentioned I'm a carer myself. At this time, I wasn't a carer. I had no lived experience, so I couldn't talk from the heart or real experience. So I was really relying on others. Building that business case to influence, to negotiate, to get a sum of money, to change a policy, and lots of you are nodding, you know those challenges. You've really got to hone in on the data. Think about what this means for your business. We were looking at this, as an inclusive agenda item, but when you start to think about retaining your talent, how challenging that is for businesses, not just now, but in the future, is really critical. So building that business case is really important. But of course, there's the skeptics, aren't there? There's always the skeptics. We introduced our first step was to introduce a paid leave, carer paid leave policy. We offer up to 70 hours flexible paid time off for caring responsibilities. Some of our executives were a little sceptic. This was taking resource away from the business. I'm showing them this big figure of people in the organisation, and all of a sudden the numbers are crunching to say we're going to lose X amount of productivity for our business. The reality is not the case. We put some budget aside to backfill and put more resource into the business. We've not tapped into that at all. Bottom line, and we're 5 years in now, the bottom line impact to our business is 1 FTE a year on that policy. Insignificant. But we've had to prove that over time. So we really were looking for trust. And of course, we had exec sponsorship, which really helped.
And I recall in a recent conversation, you said to me, on average, someone will stay longer if they're supported and people recognise them as a carer, because they actually become more loyal to the company. So I would love you to share with some of those stats.
We are a data-led organisation. Look, I've got data coming out of my ears, but one of my most favourite statistic, and there are many I can share, is on average, and we're a business that has long service, but on average, our carers have 3 to 4 years average years service than your typical person who works in TSB. So we are absolutely retaining our carers. Many of our carers refer to our approach to support as the fourth emergency service. So they only use it when they need it. There was the skeptics, of course, about abusing it, and I think that's a natural instinct, but that doesn't happen. Of the 70 hours, and we deliberately talk about hours, not days or half days, because mostly what carers need is flexibility. On average, around about 45% of that is used a year.
Yeah, and
it's not maxed out.
And I think for the real skeptics in the room, when I sometimes bring this up the first time, they all think, well, carers must be having a pina colada in Costa Rica somewhere because they're, just taking the extra leave to go on holiday.
They don't have that time.
No.
They absolutely don't have that time.
And they normally haven't gone through that experience.
And typically, many of you will know that carers come into caring at varying different stages. My experience was my husband needing major surgery, so and thankfully he's on a path to recovery. But we've got carers who've been carers all of their lives, and in those circumstances, they've typically got their support network and their routine and rhythms built around them, and therefore they don't necessarily need to draw upon this. In fact, one carer said to me once, and it's the same carer who coined the phrase fourth emergency service, said, "Look, I don't want to abuse this because there's the fear that it might be taken away from me, and it's so critical." So we do get people who need it and they take it, but on average, we don't have a culture where people are just maxing out and having those pina coladas on the beach, for sure.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're doing a lot of really good work already. Then why did you need something like KareHero? Because it sounds, because what I saw was a culture that really deeply believed in carers already and supporting them.
I think as a business, I think you can do so much, and you get to the stage where you think, actually, we need some further support here. So 5 years in, as I said, we started talking to you about almost a year ago now, are seeing some further gaps, some further insights that carers are telling us that these are really difficult. I think they were talking about spending their time trying to find care home, navigate social care benefits and so on, and really, really complex. But actually having a concierge, somebody who sat almost by their side, obviously it's on their phone, but having that personal touch for them and their family to be able to support through real expertise was a gap for us, and that's where we found Stephanie and her team.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've learned is every single person's story is very different. We've had people come in where 3 members of their family are concurrently sick with some terminal, some long-term chronic illnesses, and somewhere it's just a short-term issue, and somewhere they have young children, somewhere they don't have any children, somewhere they have siblings, somewhere and they're fighting, and somewhere they're just the only child and it's all on them. So we realise in those situations, being able to meet them where they are and then figuring out what practical tools you can apply is the most important thing.
We're also seeing a trend of sort of the concept of sandwich caring. So you've got, think about the demographics that Stephanie shared with you. So typically a carer might be now juggling with their own younger family and their older loved ones. So squashed from both ends is something really we think we have a moral obligation to really support people to be their best at work. And we use the phrase, we want you to grow your career, retain your career, and we talk about carers specifically around this and build that flexibility around them to do that.
Right, I can see the red lights almost flashing. Any one last piece of advice for everyone here who's thinking about this and that you'd like to impart?
I think Stephanie mentioned the word hidden. You will have hidden carers in your organisation. Go and seek them out. listen to them. It's very powerful. It starts you thinking about actually where can you start? How do you join the dots? How do you start influencing the people who've got the purse strings to really start making a difference?
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you. I think we only had one question. I think, again, it's a brilliant overview of kind of what you do and a real life example of what TSB have done in terms of actually bringing it to your employees and covering off all bases. First one, in terms of
Yes,
do
we do.
cover all of the UK.
Yeah.
Again, I think we've answered the blend with other people policies.
Yeah.
And I suppose from a pricing perspective, I suppose that's a more individual conversation for
Yes,
each
please feel free to
organisation.
chat.
But yeah, I think it's been an excellent overview in terms of actually how you can bring that together, and particularly myself as somebody that's got elderly parents and young children, it's so important for organisations to bring that together. And again, really brilliant to have men kind of showing that it impacts men as well.
Yeah, and I just want to say, what TSB has done, I've actually not seen many organisations do it so well, where they literally, it wasn't hidden in a corner and two people saying, we're going to fight this fight. It's literally in their DNA. When you walk through the corridors, you can feel it. And people, the environment.
We have our
culture is
chief
really
executive
phenomenal.
talking about it in an all stand-up call and promoting it.
It's
Really,
quite phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's just a phenomenal case study as well in terms of what good looks like in this space as well as what you're offering. I know we've ran over time and we've got to go to our next session, so just remind everybody to rate this session on your Slido app, and thank you for coming along.
Thank you.